Hi there, and welcome to the NPS Connected Conservation webinar series. My name is Cass Bismeyer, and I am the project specialist coordinator for our Connected Conservation community of practice. We focus on land and seascape scale conservation. Right now, you should be seeing our internal toolkit. We just like to make sure folks are familiar with this. Lots of great resources on our site, including our webinar series. All of the recordings are available here, as well as the ability to sign up for our future webinars. We also have a public-facing site. So if you're one of our partners joining in, you're welcome to check out the resources that we have available here. You can also see all of our past webinars and register for our future ones, see some of our success stories, ways to get involved, and learn a little bit more about what we are up to. I've plugged both of those links into the chat, and we are just so excited to be hosting this webinar as a part of our series focused on the Protected Area Database US. I'm going to go ahead and Mark, you should see a prompt to share your screen. Just to introduce our presenters today, we have Mark Wiltermuth. He's the branch chief for Biogeographic Science within the Science Synthesis, Analysis, and Research Program in the USGS Core Science Systems. And then we also have Lisa Johnson, who is a USGS collaborator from Boise State University and has a primary role in coordinating the development of the PAD-US. Again, we're really thrilled to have you both on today and excited to learn more about what you have been up to with PAD-US and what's to come. Mark, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Cass. It's a pleasure to be here and be able to present this this seminar, and working with Lisa on this presentation. We'll co-present and go through a bit about what PAD-US is, and kind of start from the ground up to provide a basics in when we talk about the Protected Areas Database of the US. What are we talking about? What does it consist of? And then we'll talk about some current applications. Who's using it? How are they using it? What's it good for? And then what else can be, how else can it be used? How does this inform 30 by 30 and climate opportunities? The administration's priorities, the current administration's priorities, as well as other priorities that are more persistent as well. And then we'll open up for questions and answers. And I hope to have a fair amount of time for that discussion. We're going to try to keep our presentation rather short, but there's some good stuff to present as well as talk about after. So do think about questions, and I believe we're using the chat function for those questions. But before we go there, I just want to provide a bit of a background of where does the Protected Areas Database project sit. Within USGS, we have mission areas, and the mission area that I'm within and the projects within is the Core Science Systems mission area, and within the program of Science Synthesis, Analysis, and Research. And this program really underpins USGS science. We offer nationally consistent foundational geologic, geophysical, and biodiversity data used in landscape scale conservation and resource management decision making. And we're really looking at applying these data to that decision-making process, and how do we help facilitate that? Some of our aspects of our research require high-performance computing. So our program also builds, maintains, and trains scientists on using advanced computing resources. We also have science data management expertise, and we provide that expertise through training, development of tools, and discussing best practices. The program is really working towards accelerating research and decision making, like I said before, taking an integrated science approach as well. And we do this through development of analytical tools, maps, data synthesis to provide decision makers with that actionable intelligence that they're looking for, how to best to make decisions based on science. One of the aspects of the program that brings together scientists and partners is the John Wesley Powell Center for Analysis and Synthesis. That center brings people together on focused topics to move forward the science that we're doing together with USGS scientists and our partners. We also provide long-term preservation of scientific data and collections through the USGS Library, ScienceBase as a digital trusted repository for scientific data, and also our geologic material repository with our ICE Core facility, as well as our Core Research Center. So that's the program in which PAD-US sits. And this is one of our prime projects right now that's really helping to move forward our biodiversity research, as well as our applications to deliver better information to our partners, our DOI partners and beyond. So PAD-US, is a project that really grew out of our research needs, but it's now expanded beyond only our research and looking at research of others, as well as facilitating decisions that you all make. So I'll hand it over to Lisa to describe a little bit more about PAD-US and what it is and how it's built.
Thanks, Mark. I assume everyone can hear me just fine. The vision for PAD-US, established in 2009, is to provide a one-stop shop for public lands and other protected areas to meet common needs. We're almost there, and your feedback helps us prioritize improvements. So please do share your applications and needs with us. There'll be contacts on the last slide. PAD-US is America's inventory of parks and other protected areas, managed by thousands of public agencies and nonprofits for conservation, recreation, natural resources, historic and cultural values. Hey, Mark, can you just go back just one sec? Thanks. This includes places like national parks, national wildlife refuges, state parks, Bureau of Land Management's rangelands and national monuments, national and state forests, state wildlife areas and local land trust preserves, city parks, and protected areas, like marine protected areas, I should say. Next slide, please. Together, they represent America's investment in conservation and recreation lands and waters across 50 states and all US territories. Next slide. PADIS is geospatial data of boundaries and attributes. Next slide. Representing many types of protection, including easements and fee lands held by public agencies. I'll note this term can be confusing. Fee simple relates to the land title documents, not a requirement to pay for park entry. Management designations that overlay ownership, such as wilderness, are also included along with marine protected areas and various planning boundaries. The flexible PADIS geodatabase structure separates each element and combines files such as fee plus easement to support data management and various applications. Next slide. The PADIS is designed to support many uses with standardized descriptors such as manager name and designation type, revised in response to stakeholder feedback to make consistent improvements. Next slide. Conservation and recreation measures are core attributes in the full PADIS inventory that allow users to filter data and inform questions, such as the degree of public access to areas of outdoor recreation in a state. The nationally relevant GAP status code illustrated here is a measure of management intent for the long-term protection of biodiversity. GAP status code 1 and 2 areas primarily managed for biodiversity are dark and olive green on the map and in the pie chart. They include places like national parks, wilderness, national and state wildlife refuges, nature conservancy preserves, where the conversion of natural habitat is permanently restricted. The multiple use areas, which are GAP status code 3 in gray, include places like national and many state forests, as well as Bureau of Land Management's rangelands, where extractive uses such as logging and mining are permitted and threatened and endangered species are conserved. GAP 4 areas include no known mandate for biodiversity protection. These are largely private lands. Note that many GAP 4 areas exist in the full PADIS inventory as they represent other values in the public interest, for example, farmland easements and urban parks. USGS began compiling stewardship data in the late 90s to fulfill their analysis mission to assess the conservation status of the nation's plant and animal species by combining PADGE-US with land cover and species distribution models in a GIS. Next slide. Subsets of PADGE-US are shared with North American and global partners to facilitate large-scale conservation assessments and cooperation across jurisdictional boundaries. For example, IUCN protected areas data from the PADGE-US are included in the World Database for Protected Areas. Next slide. So what's under the hood? Next slide. The development of PADGE-US involves collaboration with many state and federal agencies and nonprofits. PADIS is an aggregation. It requires high-quality spatial data published by stewards across the country. This network of data stewards contribute data and expertise to continually improve and apply PADGE-US. Next slide. A key stakeholder group is the Federal Geographic Data Committee's Federal Lands Work Group, led by U.S. Geological Survey, the National Park Service, and the Census Bureau. 14 federal agencies participate, including NOAA as the sole source of all marine protected areas data in PADGE-US, and others working to compile federal lands data to meet common agency needs. The group meets regularly to refine protocols, support applications, or raise awareness of needs and opportunities. Next slide. The PADIS State Data Steward Network includes agencies, universities, and nonprofits, anyone with compatible objectives to build and maintain an inventory of state and local government lands to support PADGE-US. Most compile state lands data only, while some also provide local government lands and those owned by local land trusts. Only a dozen or so have complete inventories with the data management capacity to support frequent PADIS updates. Many others need support. The PADIS 2.1 data release included urban parks in 14,000 cities across the nation, supported by a data sharing agreement between USGS, the Trust for Public Lands, and Ducks Unlimited to help states catch up their inventories and make them easier to maintain and improve going forward. Next slide, please. USGS partners with several national and other nonprofits to integrate their existing data sets and align standards to improve data management efficiency. For example, the National Conservation Easement Database is the source of easements in PADGE-US. Next slide. And now I'll break back to Mark to discuss foundational data.
Great. Thanks, Lisa. So PADGE-US is what we like to refer to as foundational data because it really is one of the building blocks of the data that we have within USGS that facilitates our research on biodiversity and on other priorities, such as climate, park access related to the recent administration's priorities. So PADGE-US itself, contributes to the 30 by 30 goals and can continue to contribute through the established partnerships that Lisa was referring to, as well as the implemented standards that we're using and further refining, whether they're data standards or some of our standard practices in how we're working with our partners. And we also have in PADGE-US data that will really help to contribute to a baseline to understand, not only where our protected areas are, but what other conservation lands are out there. And following this model, we really can pull together to further inform the 30 by 30 priorities and also contribute to the conservation and stewardship atlas. So thinking about our partnerships, we have really strong partners through our federal lands working group. And whether that's our close DOI partners or NOAA, as Lisa said, as a source of the marine protected areas data, We also have the state data stewards and our NGO partners. But we have more opportunities to further develop those relationships, as well as new relationships working with DOI with tribes, how to engage and collaborate with tribes on representing those lands that contribute to America's 30 by 30 vision, as well as the conservation goals and other aspects of our climate response, and also public and private access to parks that are available within those areas. Our recent, the recent report from DOI to the Climate Task Force really identifies one of the key points to how we approach this, but also how we all need to approach moving forward. And that's a broader vision of conservation and what we can do together to conserve the lands and waters of America, and how we engage is really an inclusive way where we do need to further build and broaden our engagements with the private landholders and represent those needs. So we do see within PAD the opportunity to expand our stakeholder group and learn more about what kind of data will be informative to meet the goals that have been laid out. So specific to PAD, one of the things that we're doing now is producing annual updates to the protected areas database. So those are the protected areas that Lisa was describing, and we're on an annual cycle now as the database has matured to provide that protected area data. We're also providing analytics for land management and protection status, as well as public access. And we'll continue to do that on an annual basis. So those data can be used and are currently being used for local to global applications in biodiversity protection, climate adaptation and mitigation, connectivity of these lands, and understanding what that means for wildlife, and what kind of access does the public have to parks. So specifically, here are a few, just a handful of current uses where for the National Park Service, we know that PAD US is being used to understand land ownership and management, not only of National Park Service lands, but what's the landscape look like? What's the context of those lands? True for other DOI land managers and federal, state, and local managers too. Same use is applicable. We know that the National Wildfire Coordinating Group is using PAD US as a data source for understanding their planning for fire response, as well as during operation times. These data help to coordinate those efforts. States are using PAD for their state wildlife action plans as they consider what areas are protected in their conservation opportunity areas and planning for any conservation management actions at the state level. Recreation and healthy communities are a priority, and already CDC and National Park Service are promoting and using PAD to get people outdoors more frequently. For example, the CDC has developed a health assessment kit that uses PAD data in that tool. Lisa mentioned that we do contribute to the global and the North American scale databases on conservation and protection or protected areas. Those analyses and data sharing are really important, and it is a two-way street in those collaborations, because those partnerships for us help us to inform how better to manage data and how to increase our interoperability, not only within the PAD US network of data stewards, but also globally. How do we better participate, and how can we find efficiencies in these collaborations, help us nationally improve our systems? Thinking forward now, how else can PAD US be used to address the 30 by 30 priorities, as well as climate science and mitigation of climate change? biodiversity protection status is one of the foundations where this database really grew out of our research. But now as we face climate change, a lot more can be done with assessing climate variability. So, and vulnerability. So going forward, we already see some research being conducted on predicting changes in climate and biodiversity, and what are the responses and what are the opportunities to, for instance, build corridors. There's also a lot of work currently ongoing with assessing habitats and threats and species of concern, or just rare species in themselves. What are the vulnerabilities to biodiversity as climate changes? But one of the key points here is that PADUS enables the priority of conservation goals of 30% of US lands and oceans by 2030 through integrating additional data sets and conducting that research of what areas are currently protected, what's the diversity of those areas, as well as where do we need more protection for sake of biodiversity as well as habitat conservation. The PADUS also promotes and can continue to facilitate research on park equity. Where are those parks? Where are the parks that offer opportunities to get outside? Recently, we've added within this last release more local parks into the database, and we'll continue to work with our state and local data stewards to continue to build the data that represents what's on the ground. So in summary, PADUS is an authoritative inventory of America's protected lands. And as we talk about authority, that really comes from the recognition that PADUS is a national geospatial asset from the Federal Geospatial Data Committee. We have a long history of supporting conservation and land management needs, and it represents that single source for integrated federal, state, and NGO lands within one database. We take a standards-based approach, whether it's how we're serving data, how we're managing data coming in from our various data stewards, and how we contribute data to the global and continental scale. PADUS really can contribute to the baseline data to track and monitor 30 by 30 performance as we continue to expand the network of our data stewards and expand the contents and the attributes within the database to reflect the goals that have been laid forth in the Conserving and Restoring America the Beautiful. There are several goals in there, and this model of the database has the ability to be flexible and adaptable so that we can fine tune to the goals and addressing the tracking and monitoring aspects that we'll be needing to be able to do. And lastly, really contributions to climate goals. Continuing to facilitate our research on climate change, and that's one of the essential threats within biodiversity, but also conservation of lands and waters in general. And with that, I do want to open it up for questions and answers. But before we do, just a note on our website. The PADUS website is at that link. Again, it comes out of the Gap Analysis Research Project, and you'll see that representation on the website as well. Announcements do come out through the PADUS at USGS.gov email list, so you can sign up there, and our contact information for myself and Lisa is included there. So with that, I'll pass it to Cass to moderate questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Mark and Lisa, for that excellent presentation. We do have a few questions in our queue already. Folks, as a reminder, feel free to go ahead and just plug in any questions that you have. If we don't end up getting to them, Mark and Lisa will coordinate following up with you individually. So First question here, Mark. Can you please elaborate on efforts to work with tribes and tribal lands?
Yeah, so, I think the best way to describe it is right now we will be working with DOI to find out the most appropriate path forward to establish a more collaborative effort to represent those lands, and how best to do that. As the Secretary has laid out, it's an important priority within the administration, and we are really interested in participating how we can to represent those lands appropriately. And we do welcome engagement on that. But I think, the primary answer to that is that we'll be working with DOI to figure out the most appropriate path forward to coordinate that effort.
Great. And another question here, does GAP 4 represent all other lands?
Yeah, okay. So this is a common question, and happy to address this. And so GAP 4 is any land that has, where there's unknown biodiversity protection, right? So that would represent all lands. Now, as Lisa pointed out, as she went over the GAP categories, those lands that are included in the database are in the database because they represent some other value versus the GAP status of 1, 2, or 3 for biodiversity management and the multi-use lands. So when we calculate statistics, and maybe this is the easiest way to understand it, GAP 4 represents everything that is not 1, 2, or 3. But the reason why there are polygons within the database to represent those lands of GAP 4 is because they have some other value. It could be that there's public access, and that's represented in the database. So yes, they do represent all other lands that are not 1, 2, or 3 within the GAP classification.
This one could, I guess, kind of follow up to that question about why some easements might be counted in status 3 while others are not.
Okay, so some easements, and I might pass to Lisa on this if I don't give an adequate response, but so it will depend on the type of easement and the communication that we've had with the managing agency or organization to understand what the purpose is. Now, ideally, we could have unit by unit classification of the easements, and there will classification within the GAP analysis or other public access or other metrics. But some easements overall might have a fit to the GAP 3, where others might not be GAP 3, could be 4 or 2. So it's kind of a determination made in collaboration with the managing agency or organization. Lisa, real quick, is there anything else to add on what the differences might be? I don't know that we need to get down into each type,
No.
but.
I guess I will just point out that there is a crosswalk available in the PADIS data manual that's online off of our website that you can see. And for example, forest stewardship easements can be GAP 3, where there is, again, habitat protection, but also extractive uses.
Yeah.
So you can see all the different easement classifications there.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. That's a good thing to point to, as the default classification, and then any additional information provided by the data stewards and in collaboration with USGS on this, of how each unit or the type of unit gets classified.
One more general question, and then there's quite a few questions that are more specific to 30 by 30, as you expect. how can the pad be more user-friendly while also providing more information?
Yeah, it's a good question. Thanks for that response. And I think as this project has grown and evolved out of our research, there are, steps towards, improving how we manage the data and also deliver the data and make it user friendly. So just, it's a continuous evolution process, but I think we're at the cusp now that it's a mature enough project that we really need to invest the resources to make it more user friendly. One of the challenges with it is there's a lot of information within the full inventory database. Now, you see on the screen right now the pad viewer, and there are 13 data sets within there. That just kind of reflects the complexity within the database itself. So one step forward that we're making is to communicate within our website of what are the common uses and what are the things that people are really wanting to know about, and providing that information and linking to the data set to provide that overall information. So that's something that we're working on right now, as well as looking at how to improve our web applications to make querying the data more user-friendly. How can you do that online? So those are things that we're working on right now to improve.
Great. A few questions on 30 by 30.
Yeah.
First one, is the PAD US team involved in discussions over the concept of other effective means of conservation, as mentioned in the Convention on Biological Diversity? And how may this play, or this will play a big role in 30 by 30 in other countries? How are we involved?
Yeah, so good question. And I'll take one step back on that. Is the PAD US database has not only the GAP status codes, but also the IUCN protected areas categories. Then so the next step to the question is the other effective conservation measures, and that laid out by IUCN. There's a methodology as well as some use cases. So with that, we are in conversation, and Lisa has actually participated in some of those conversations, as well as others within the network. And we'll continue to participate where we can on that to understand more and contribute, but also work with all of our stakeholders and partners within DOI, within Department of Ag, within RCS, as well as within Commerce with NOAA on what does that mean going forward, and how do we evaluate the other effective conservation measures approached by IUCN, and how best to move forward to capture or characterize the lands that might not meet the protected areas qualifications.
Can you further describe how PAD US might be able to help monitor our 30 by 30 performance?
Yeah, so again, PAD US right now is offering up the protected areas as well as the multi-use lands, as well as other conservation or other values within those GAP4 categories. By having multiple metrics within the database and adding more, we're able to manage those data and present not only the protected areas, but we can also provide public access and do. So within our, on our webpage, we also provide an analysis and the data on public access lands. One of the key things that we really need is help. We need help from all of you that are managing like data to be working with data stewards and working with our network to further build out the data within the database. And we'll be working with DOI and everybody that's involved in understanding what a tracking mechanism will look like for 30 by 30 or conserving and restoring America the Beautiful, as well as figuring out where does PAD fit within the Conservation and Stewardship Atlas. How does that look and work? So a lot of discussions to come, and we hope PAD US is within those, and anticipate that we'll be able to contribute beyond the protected areas, but help to inform based on the experiences that we've had managing this type of data.
Another question on 30 by 30, Mark, and then there's a few other just more general ones. This person's asking about the baseline for the 30 by 30 initiative. There was a slide that showed 30% of the country is considered protected in GAP 1, 2, and 3. Are we already there, or where are we at as far as the 30 by 30 goal?
Yeah, so I think I need to be really clear on this one, because there is a lot of confusion and we want to get it right. And the gap, the slide that we showed that had 12%, and you've seen that in the DOI fact sheet, 12% of lands that are already protected for biodiversity management. Then there was 18% of the multi-use lands, right? So one of the key distinctions here is, as we talk about protected areas, and especially that 12% number, that is GAP 1 and 2 that have that permanent protection with the primary intent for biodiversity management. That also aligns directly with the IUCN protected areas categories. And that's represented within the world database, but also within the analysis for North America. The multi-use lands is where the definition of conservation broadens. So there's more work to be done on that. And how do we define what is qualifying as conservation? You know, is it specific for biodiversity? Is it within the priorities of public access and the goal is to get people outside in healthier communities? There are a lot of recreation goals out there too. So there's a lot to be determined on how we go forward with representing conservation within an atlas towards multiple goals. So I think there's a lot to be determined on that. And I guess there are the numbers that we present, but again, the context really matters. And I think that's an important message, is that we need to figure out towards what goals and how we measure that, and we need to do it together.
Great, thank you. And thank you for taking your time with that. I think that is the big question, right? It's the elephant in the room. How do we decide on that shared definition and what that looks like? A few more questions here. What role do state agencies have in feeding information to the protected area database? And then kind of a follow-up to that, you had mentioned a federal lands working group. Is there something similar for states and NGOs?
Yeah. Okay, so within those go right together well. And so we have the federal lands working group, but we also have a state lands working group that's less formal than the federal lands working group. And might ask for Lisa to chime in to correct anything I say on that. But what it is a network of states and NGOs that are helping to get lands represented that are not part of the federal estate, that are not part of that, the federally managed lands. So state agencies may be participating in that. State agencies might be working with some of our NGO partners to get those data. And we need further engagement. We actually have, a list of contacts, that are state data stewards. And we do assess what is the status of those data? What's the status of, each individual state? You did see a map on one of the previous slides about states that information in forms. So we really do want to make sure that we do have state representatives and working with state agencies, and do it through a network, our current network, but also expanding as we need to in order to continue to get updated and current data. Lisa, anything to add about kind of that state lands working group that might not have touched on?
I think you've generally covered it. The intention is to eventually bring it into the Federal Geographic Data Committee's working groups as a subgroup, and there's been progress on that. But meanwhile, there's webinars and a contact list, and if you're interested in participating, please do hit that PADIS announcements, and we'll make sure you're invited.
Yeah.
Great. Just two more questions here to round us out. Are there plans to address duplicates in the PAD? For example, Fish and Wildlife Service waterfowl production area polygons are duplicated in North and South Dakota and not easily managed due to slight differences in data sources and attributes.
Yeah. So I don't want this to sound like deflecting, but it's an important point. The data that we get, that quality is really important, and we're going to try to help, and we do try to help identify where there are errors, and we do directly reach out to those agencies to identify where there are errors, where there's overlap. It might not be just a complete duplication, but there might be overlap. There are some nuances within the full inventory, however, of legislative boundaries or the fee title lands and designations where there's legitimate overlap because of the type of polygon that you're looking at. But quality of data coming in is really important, and we're trying to work on that and clean that up. But what we are doing is asking that the data contributor, the data manager, clean it up on the source side. But we're working hard to identify those, provide that information so that they can do that.
Is there an online help system for PAD US data details?
There is. I don't have the address for that, but if you go to our website, there is a help system on the PAD US website, and I believe it's under data and tools.
Great, and I did drop that link into the chat, folks, so you should be able to just click on that. It'll take you directly to the PAD US website. Lisa, did you have something to add to that?
Just that there is an online tool as well at protectedlands.net/help that the USGS website refers to. That provides additional information.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just a note on that website is kind of our sandbox, if you will, for our partnership. Lisa had mentioned some of our NGO partners that are helping us, not only with data collection and aggregation, but also with communication and some of these tools.
Great. And one last question here before we round it out for the day. And folks, just a reminder, we did record our webinar here today. So if you know someone who would benefit from watching it, you should receive a follow-up email with the link to that. Feel free to share that. We'll post it on our external site as well as our internal toolbox. And we hope that you plan to tune into some of our future webinars in the series. Are wetland and stream restoration easements represented, and or do those data come from the NCED?
Okay, the specific easements within NCED, I don't know off the top of my head, but those easements, if they're in the database, they would be represented within PAD US if they're appropriate. Some of the easement data we don't handle ourselves, but the Ducks Unlimited and Trust for Public Lands partners due to assemble the National Conservation Easement Database. Now, if they're not, but they're appropriate, I think that those easements likely should be included in the inventory overall, and I think that's something to work on. Lisa, do you know specific if those types of easements are in the NCED?
There are various types of easements included in the large bucket of conservation easement that is included through NCED. The Fish and Wildlife Service waterfowl protection area easements are also included. But there are some things going on there. So, yeah.
Yeah, so I guess the general response is we're trying to include those, and what it does take is the mechanism through the data stewards to ensure that either they're in the easement database that then feeds into PADUS, or that we're working with that agency to include those. And there are others other conservation easements or agreements that we know are not included, and we're working to represent those.
Great. Well, Mark and Lisa, thank you so much for taking the time to present to us today and to answer questions from the group. We know you both are very busy right now, especially in light of the recent report that came out and 30 by 30 in preparation for things around that. So again, thank you on behalf of the National Park Service for spending some time with us. Folks, if you're still with us, just a reminder, our next webinar, we're actually in the middle of a mini series focused on the Great American Outdoors Act. Will take place May 19th at 12 Pacific, 3 Eastern, focused on using LWCF to meet NPS conservation goals and to collaborate across the landscapes. I dropped the link into the to register into the chat. You'll also receive that as a follow-up in the email coming to you tomorrow from GoToWebinar. So again, thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks again, Mark and Lisa.
Thank you.
Thank you.